It's a money fight, I get you, and you want to make money. But at some point in time, if you keep telling us that you're taking boxing seriously and you want to be recognized as a big-time boxer/fighter, you're gonna have to fight somebody closer to your age, who is a contender at the very least.
Jake Paul fight announcement, another circus act, another clown show. A fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta "Tank" Davis has been announced as an exhibition fight.
The fight that I couldn't believe, that was too insane and honestly just baffling to think would be a real fight in 2025, reminds you that combat sports are the craziest sports on the planet.
Did Jake Paul just announce the most insane boxing match of 2025? Because what I'm about to tell you is so absolutely bonkers that even the most seasoned boxing experts are calling it a straight-up circus act. We're talking about a fight announcement that is Stephen A. Smith losing his absolute mind, former world champions shaking their heads in disbelief, and the entire boxing world questioning if we've officially entered the twilight zone of combat sports.
I've always been a fan of Jake because I think that what Jake tries to do for the sport of boxing, I think people don't realize the importance of him being able to promote for himself and not being reliant on the promoters, who I believe has held the sport hostage. The only critique I've ever given Jake, I just want Jake to fight boxers. Like Nate Diaz, we know his reputation. We know the man can fight. We know in the octagon he could be something special. But we know you breathe on him, he starts bleeding.
It's a fair critique. And you know what? He should fight boxers, but then again, should he? Because I'll tell you why. If you're a human who can rake in $6 to $10 million fighting people that you know you're going to beat, and you want to build a resume and a record that's impressive with a good highlight reel, you got to be strategic about this shit. Jake's 25, 26. He's got so much time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I get where you coming from. All I'm saying is, we don't know your skill set because you haven't been in there with anybody really skilled.
Jake Paul versus Gervonta "Tank" Davis, an exhibition fight that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. We're talking about a 6'2" cruiserweight YouTuber going up against a 5'5" lightweight world champion. And the size difference is so ridiculous that it's literally like watching David versus Goliath, except David has way better boxing skills and Goliath has a massive social media following. But before we dive into this absolute madness, make sure you smash that subscribe button because this story gets crazier by the minute.
Performance. Jake Paul won the fight. But yeah, that was that. This time, Jake Paul is to take on Tank Davis. Tank Davis, he was recently in the news for being arrested for a domestic violence incident involving one of his kids' mother. He was alleged to have slapped her about the place. The charges were later dropped, to be fair to him. But yeah, that was when he was last in the news. What is interesting is just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was saying openly that he'd lost his passion for boxing and that he wanted time away from the sport. There was speculation that he might even retire as he was experiencing extreme mental fatigue from boxing, depression, and there were mental health concerns over him. However, I guess the opportunity to earn a truck full of money, fighting a completely worthless exhibition fight against Jake Paul, was enough to make him change his mind about boxing. Funny that, isn't it? But you know what? I'm not even going to waste your time or mine critiquing this utter nonsense. Suffice to say that this so-called fight we're talking about is an exhibition, and it pits Jake Paul, who is a cruiserweight, by the way, weighs in excess of 200 pounds, and Tank Davis, who is, he was the WBA lightweight champion, who weighs in at about 135 pounds when he fights. So that's a disparity of some 65 pounds. In old money, that's about 4.5 stone. There's also a significant difference in height. Jake Paul is roughly, 6'1", 2. Gervonta Davis is 5'5" at best. So, there's a height disparity there of some 8 inches.
Let me paint you the picture of just how wild this announcement was. Picture this. It's just another Tuesday in the boxing world. Everyone's minding their own business. When BAM, Jake Paul drops this bomb that sent shockwaves through the entire sport. We're not just talking about any regular fight here. This is an exhibition match that defies every single rule of logic, weight classes, and common sense that boxing has ever known.
But again, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And we've seen that Jake will kind of bounce in between doing these entertainment fights and then, trying to push toward his goal of ingraining himself in the sport of boxing, and kind of does both of them. So it's kind of a weird place to be, because he wants the respect of the boxing fans and the boxing hierarchy and hardcore boxing people, but at the same time, he'll gain some of that and then lose some of it. It's like a seesaw of his fights. Like one fight, and be like, okay, that's a real fight, or that's a real fight. And he'll go and he'll win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, real fighter, maybe past his prime, whatever, but Jake goes and wins that fight pretty easily, and then gets a lot of respect, gets a lot of the boxing hardcore love. And you have these talks about him fighting Anthony Joshua, and that was going to get even more respect. More people were like, that's fucking crazy. What are you doing? Myself included. That seemed like a massive risk, but a lot of people were like, okay, fair play. Anthony Joshua, that's a real heavyweight. Jake wants to fight him. He's a psycho, but fair play. And then you announce this one, and it's like, well, that's the same thing people have been saying about Jake for years, so it's a weird spot to be in for him for sure. But I talked about this not being the first choice, and I don't think it was, because Coppinger reports next that talks for Jake Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Now, we had all heard the talks, and they were pretty public, from Eddie Hearn, from Jake. Nakisa Badarian, Jake's manager, was over in the UK on, I think, Sky Sports, talking about the fight and saying how it was a real possibility and they were really starting to work on it. And now Mike Coppinger says that the talks for Jake and Joshua fell apart over broadcasting issue.
And Stephen A. Smith. Oh my goodness. Stephen A. Smith went absolutely nuclear on this announcement. This man did not hold back one single bit when he heard about Jake Paul versus Tank Davis. Smith came out swinging harder than both fighters combined, calling this whole situation nothing short of a circus, a complete and utter clown show that makes a mockery of everything boxing stands for. But here's the thing that really got Stephen A. fired up. He actually acknowledges that Jake Paul knows how to promote himself and turn fights into massive spectacles, but is saying boxing deserves so much better than this.
That I gave too much credit to Paul. Why? He's done a hell of a job to put himself in this position. He sold himself. He sold his dream. He took his dream. He took his idea, and he put it out there, and he made it happen. Give him credit for that. And he made it happen. And he took risk along the way. Yeah, he picked his spots. He's in the driver's seat. He gets to pick his spots. He's the one bringing the money. He's the one promoting. Yeah, he's the name. He made himself that, coming from where he came from, with all his followers and the whole thing, and just the uniqueness of what he was doing. But he has learned along the way. He's not a top guy yet. No, I don't know that he ever will be. He didn't have that amateur background and the things that you usually need to be a top guy. But he has improved. He is a work in progress. He is a guy that you got to give him credit that he's respected the sport. He went out there, he's worked hard at it, and he's gotten himself into this position. Having said all of that, this might be a step too far. Now, when I say it, I'm also, I try to be responsible. I've been in this game 50 years, so I know where not to step, where you could twist an ankle, or worse, you could break a leg or fall down. When I say that with the understanding, too, that Joshua's coming off being knocked out.
Smith was basically screaming from the rooftops that if Jake Paul really wants to be taken seriously as a legitimate boxer, if he really wants that respect from the boxing community and hardcore fans, then he needs to stop chasing these shock value matchups and start facing opponents who actually make sense. We're talking about fighters closer to his age, fighters in his weight class, fighters who are actual contenders rather than these wild publicity stunts that generate headlines, but don't prove anything about his actual boxing skills.
That's probably where the problem was. So I think that fight is sort of like dead and buried in the water. And we get Gervonta Davis, man, like you guys said it. He's a 135-pound world champion, lightweight world champion. The guy's my height. He's 5'5", and Jake Paul is a cruiserweight. He walks around at sort of like 15 stone. So, and it's an exhibition. So look, if you buy into that, then yeah, fine. But it's not one for me.
Spence, let me ask you this: if you were European champion, right?
Yes.
Before you had to retire, Sally, you were European champion. If you were, how tall are you? What are you at? 4'8", 4'9"?
5'5".
5'5". Okay. If you were in your pomp at European champion and you were 5'5" and you were fighting Jake Paul, would you fancy your chances?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, definitely. I think I fancy my chances. I think Gervonta Davis actually beats him as well. He's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world at lightweight. But it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? It's like you got a guy of 5'5" boxing a guy of 6 foot plus. Cruiserweight. Yeah, it's just all a little bit odd. I thought if they're going to do an exhibition, perhaps Jake should have picked someone more his size. Look, his last fight against Julio Chavez Jr. Was at cruiserweight. Chavez Jr. was a former world champion at middleweight himself, and that sort of made sense. And it was a good win for Jake Paul. You know, he come out there and he beats an ex-world champion. He gets a little bit of credibility, and you go, right, now you're heading in the right direction.
But Stephen A. Smith isn't the only one going absolutely crazy over this announcement. Boxing analysts across the board are calling Jake Paul's latest move just another circus act in what's becoming a very predictable pattern. These experts are pointing out that most of Jake Paul's fights completely lack any real competitive logic or balance, and they are designed way more for grabbing attention and generating social media buzz than actually testing his boxing credibility or advancing the sport in any meaningful way.
It's win-win for Gervonta as much as it is for Jake. Jake, it's like, okay, you're fighting a former world lightweight champion. You're bigger, so you have some advantages, even if you're, at a severe skill disadvantage. You're not supposed to expect to do anything, but if you do, it's even, it's bananas for you. It's great. Gervonta, I don't know. What if Jake hits him? Jake's a big guy. I don't know if Gervonta stood next to Jake. Jake's a big guy.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
And Gervonta is small even by lightweight standards.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a David and Goliath fight. It's just, the David character in Gervonta is much, much more skilled. But I guess that's the thought process. As far as what it does for boxing, well, absolutely nothing. But then again, what have Gervonta Davis and Jake Paul really done for boxing in the ring aspect? Because Jake,
very good promoter.
I am a believer in Jake as a promoter, and I think that he has a future as a promoter, and I think he's done very well as a promoter, and I think his company has done some very good things for the sport, and for young fighters, and for brewing talent and making good fights on that basis. But as far as from fighters' perspective, what do they do for boxing from a fighter's perspective? I don't think Gervonta Davis has ever done anything for boxing, honestly. Like I feel like TV has just in this generation, they just create stars, and then they just tell you, okay, we're gonna make this guy the star. It's like they're pre-created, and then they just tell you.
Think about it. Instead of facing opponents who make sense stylistically or fall within appropriate weight classes, Jake Paul keeps choosing these completely unusual matchups that leave everyone scratching their heads. The result? Sure. We get entertaining spectacles that break the internet and generate millions of views, but we're not getting serious boxing contests that actually prove anything about Jake Paul's legitimate fighting abilities.
Here we go again, people. Another Jake Paul fight, another embarrassing night for boxing. Said this a few times now, and I'm really getting sick of it. 10 rounds of tediousness, whereby Jake Paul was just, I say throwing punches, a lot of them didn't have any zip on them against an opponent that was just compliant. He holds boxing in contempt. He's basically pimping the sport. That's what Jake Paul is doing. And I find it unacceptable, I really do. The whole Jake Paul brand is actually bad for boxing. Taking advantage of the sport, pimping the sport, fighting washed up MMA fighters, former fighters, and now we're hearing that he's about to enter the WBA rankings and could be in line for a world title shot. Absolute farce. He couldn't get away with it in any other sport, and that's what makes me so mad.
Now let's talk about Tank Davis for a hot minute, because his story leading up to this fight is absolutely wild. This guy was recently in the news for all the wrong reasons. We're talking about a domestic violence incident involving one of his children's mothers. Tank Davis was allegedly involved in some serious drama, though the charges were eventually dropped. But that's not even the craziest part of his recent story.
Jake Paul was supposed to be fighting AJ. Eddie Hearn announced 99% done, which we've just spoke about. What next for AJ? Potentially Jake Paul. But it now looks like that Jake Paul is fighting one of Anthony Joshua's legs. He's fighting Gervonta Davis, somebody who's a quarter of his size. I don't even know what's going on. Has Eddie Hearn been played? Let me know what you think. But the AJ fight with Jake Paul's finished. Gervonta Davis Fake Paul, November. I don't know what's going on in the world of boxing. This is an absolute joke. What next for AJ? We'll get into this, and there's so many questions I want to get into.
Just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was openly telling everyone that he had completely lost his passion for boxing. This man was talking about wanting time away from the sport, dealing with extreme mental fatigue, depression, and serious mental health concerns that were affecting his entire career. There was legitimate speculation that he might actually retire from boxing altogether because he was experiencing such severe burnout from the sport that made him famous.
This had been being talked about even prior to the Lamont Roach fight. I thought it was so utterly ridiculous, especially that you've essentially manufactured Gervonta into a star without really having him fight any major threats in his career, you know? I know the groupies, they're going to say somebody like saying, well, if Leo Santa Cruz is the biggest name on your resume, you got a problem. Like Santa Cruz was probably dying shot by the time he fought Gervonta Davis. Santa Cruz, who 90% of his own resume was against guys you never heard of. And again, it was a one-directional fighter who started at bantamweight, and they fought at 130. That's your best win. Pedraza's a solid win, I thought, even though it was a weight-drained Pedraza, and Pedraza was so weight-drained that he'd actually already lost to Edna Cherry and should have already not been champion by the time Gervonta fought him, but they robbed Edna Cherry in that IBF title defense of Jose Pedraza, so that Pedraza remained champion. I remember because I worked that show and commentated that fight. So it's a sneaky good win, but it's sort of below the radar, not that good of a win. You had a weight-drained Pedraza, a Pedraza who went up to lightweight and actually fought better once he didn't have to weight-drain himself, and who had been struggling already at 130 prior to being knocked out by Davis. Like I said, he'd already lost to Cherry and was lucky to keep the title in the Cherry fight at 130. So Cherry, mind you, a guy that I beat way back in the day. I don't know. It's mind you, I beat him easily, like 9 out of 10 rounds, 10 out of 10 rounds, something like that. I don't know. I really don't know what to make of this, man. I sure as hell love to hear the comments. It's gonna generate curiosity for sure. Jake Paul is huge. I mean, this is like, he's going to be almost a foot bigger than Gervonta Davis. This is an exhibition, so there's not going to be an official winner unless there's a stoppage. So things like glove size, ring size still has to be dictated and figured out. I don't know. I don't know what you do with this. I don't know what boxing's coming to. This is what happens when you manufacture a star instead of letting stars organically create them.
But apparently, the opportunity to earn an absolutely massive truck full of money fighting in a completely meaningless exhibition against Jake Paul was enough to magically restore his passion for boxing. Funny how that works, right? Money has this incredible ability to cure mental fatigue and suddenly make people remember why they love fighting again.
Twice, big numbers. Jake Paul fought against Tommy Fury, big numbers. Jake Paul, who I believe, and I have told you guys this time and time again, he's much better than people give him credit for. One, Jake Paul is not an amateur fighter, like some try to say. Jake Paul has money, so Jake Paul is getting trained by the best boxing coaches that money can buy. He's full-time boxing. There are a lot of people that say he may do some other stuff. I don't know who he was going to fight that was saying that he was juiced up and he was ignoring him. Or was it Logan Paul? One of them. But at the end of the day, this kid's training to be the best fighter in the world, or the best as he can be, and he understands what losing would do to the perception of who he is in fighting. We were yelling so much about him fighting someone. Fight somebody your size. Fight somebody, a real boxer. Stop fighting MMA guys. There were so many things that people were mad about in regards to his level of competition and the people he was competing against. Well, today we learned that Jake Paul has his next opponent. His next opponent is by far the most credentialed guy actively. Many I want to jump down my throat and say, well, Mike Tyson is active.
Now, let's break down the absolutely mind-blowing physical mismatch we're dealing with here, because the size difference between these two fighters is so extreme that it borders on the ridiculous. Jake Paul is a full-blown cruiserweight who walks around at over 200 pounds and stands somewhere between 6'1" and 6'2". Meanwhile, Tank Davis is a former WBA lightweight champion who typically fights at around 135 pounds and stands just 5'5" on his best day.